We are very close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, but I still need your support. Please don't forget to take a second and subscribe to my channel. The storm had rolled in from the Dakotas sometime after midnight, a slow-moving wall of white that swallowed highways, farms, and the faint orange glow of small-town streetlights. By 3:15 a.m., Grayson County's dispatch logs noted sustained winds over 40 miles per hour, visibility reduced to less than 10 feet, and a temperature that hovered at 12 below zero. The kind of cold that froze exhaust fumes midair and made metal scream when it bent. Out there on County Road 7, a snowplow traced its lonely circuit through the storm, a 1979 Oshkosh single-axle model. Orange paint dulled to rust, its roof-mounted beacon pulsing faintly against the dark. The operator was Tom Keller, 38 years old, a county maintenance worker with 12 winters behind the wheel. Keller was known for his reliability. He never missed a shift, never called in sick, never complained about the hours. His wife, Mara, often joked that he loved his plow more than he loved sleep. The crew at the highway garage said if Tom took a route, you could bet your life that every mile would be clear by sunrise. He was the kind of man small towns relied on without realizing it. At 2:41 a.m., Keller radioed dispatch from mile marker 43. "Visibility's getting bad out here, but I'll finish the loop before the next run," he said. Static filled the line for a moment before the dispatcher, Donna Pike, replied, "Copy that, Tom. Check in at the highway garage before you head east again." He never did. At 3:17 a.m., a county deputy responding to an unrelated accident on Route 7 saw the glow of a beacon through the snow. The plow had left the road, cutting diagonally through a ditch and into a cluster of black spruce trees. The engine was still running. The wipers scraped a rhythm against the glass, clearing arcs that revealed an empty driver's seat. The transmission sat in neutral. The headlights burned into the white haze, casting long, unsteady shadows. Deputy Mark Heller approached cautiously, boots sinking into snow that reached nearly to his knees. The wind tore his breath away. The cab door was shut but unlocked. Inside, the heat blasted from the vents, and Keller's parka still hung from the hook behind the seat. His gloves lay neatly folded on the dash. The two-way radio was tuned to dispatch, but silent. Heller noted the time, 3:23 a.m., then called it in. "County, I've got Keller's rig on Route 7. Vehicle's operational, no sign of the driver." By dawn, the blizzard had eased enough for search teams to begin grid sweeps. They followed protocol, 20-foot spacing, high-visibility jackets, and GPS beacons clipped to their belts. But there were no footprints leading away from the plow. No drag marks, no signs of struggle. Just the churned tracks of the heavy tires ending at the tree line and a smooth blanket of snow beyond. Inside the cab, investigators cataloged every detail. The thermos in the cup holder still held warm coffee. The driver's log, clipped to a clipboard, ended with a neat entry at 2:40 a.m. Segment 3 complete. Keller's lunch pail sat unopened on the passenger floor. His wallet, containing $73 and a faded photo of his wife and 2 sons, was in the center console. The ignition key remained in place. Forensics dusted every surface. Nothing unusual. By 9 a.m., Sheriff Ed Mathers declared it an active missing person case. The county maintenance yard became an impromptu command post. Keller's co-workers gathered in silence, staring at the plow's empty parking bay. Mara arrived mid-morning, still wearing her robe under a winter coat, disbelief hardening into dread. She told the sheriff that Tom had left home around 11:30 p.m., promising to finish his route before the worst of the storm. He'd kissed her on the forehead and said he'd be home before sunrise. She'd woken at 5 to an empty bed and a news bulletin about an abandoned snowplow. The first 24 hours turned into 48, then 72. Search efforts expanded across 50 square miles of rural farmland, frozen marsh, and dense woodland. State troopers joined local volunteers, and helicopters scanned the area with thermal imaging equipment, though the extreme cold rendered most readings unreliable. Every lead evaporated under scrutiny. Dogs lost scent trails within yards of the plow, their noses overwhelmed by windburn and ice. Reporters arrived by the weekend. The Milwaukee Sentinel ran the headline, "Snowplow operator vanishes in storm. No tracks, no clues." Locals offered theories. He'd stepped out to check the blade and become disoriented. He'd suffered a medical event and wandered into the dark. He'd been abducted, though no one could explain how or by whom on a night when every road was impassable. The sheriff's department issued a timeline for the press. 2 a.m. Keller begins final route segment. 2:41 a.m. Last confirmed radio contact. 3:17 a.m. Deputy Heller discovers the plow. 3:23 a.m. Scene secured. 5 a.m. Search teams mobilized. Forensic photographs captured the scene in bleak monochrome. The massive orange machine leaning against a tree, headlights cutting through flurries, and the frozen swirl of exhaust crystallizing in midair. Technicians measured snow depth, wind direction, and temperature. None of it made sense. If Keller had exited the cab, his footprints should have registered at least briefly before wind filled them in. Yet even the area immediately beneath the door was undisturbed, as if he'd stepped into thin air. By the end of the first week, rumors began to spread through Ashbury, the small town nearest Route 7. Some swore they'd seen unusual lights over the marsh that night. Others whispered about Keller's mental state, debts, exhaustion, marital strain. But Mara dismissed the gossip. Tom didn't run, she told reporters. He would never leave his family, not in the middle of a storm, not ever. Deputy Heller, who'd been first on scene, couldn't shake the image of the plow idling in the snow. He described the moment in his report. Everything about that truck felt wrong. The heat was blasting, the seatbelt unbuckled, coffee still steaming. Like he'd just stepped out and vanished. Sheriff Mathers requested assistance from the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation. Agent Daniel Ross, a former homicide detective from Madison, arrived on February 3rd to review the file. Ross approached it like a missing person case with foul play potential. His first act was to have the plow transported to a climate-controlled garage for forensic re-examination. Under high-resolution photography, technicians noticed faint smudges on the inside of the windshield, horizontal streaks consistent with gloved hands wiping condensation. But there were also 3 distinct vertical marks on the passenger window, each roughly half an inch wide, as if someone had pressed their fingertips against the glass from outside. Ross ordered additional tests. The prints were partial and degraded, but the lab confirmed they didn't belong to Keller. There was no DNA, no identifiable ridge detail, just the ghostly suggestion of fingers that had touched cold glass in the middle of a blizzard. On February 10th, a week after the disappearance, the sheriff's department convened a town meeting in the Ashbury High School gymnasium. Residents filled the bleachers, bundled in coats, clutching styrofoam cups of coffee. Sheriff Mathers stood at a microphone beneath a banner that read, "Community Safety Update." He spoke for 12 minutes, reciting facts that only deepened confusion. The plow had traveled approximately 2 miles with no operator, maintaining a steady course before veering right and stopping. Its throttle and steering mechanisms were intact, and there was no sign of tampering. Engineers concluded that the vehicle had coasted in gear, driven by inertia until friction and terrain forced it to stop. When Mathers finished, someone in the back shouted, "So what are you saying?" That he disappeared into thin air? The sheriff didn't answer. By March, snowmelt exposed the ground around the crash site. Investigators hoped thawing would reveal new evidence, fabric fibers, personal items, anything that might indicate a direction of travel. They found nothing. The case officially went cold on April 17, 1992. But in the quiet months that followed, strange details began to surface. A trucker passing through the county reported hearing a distress call on CB radio that same night, a man's voice repeating, "Need assistance? Something's wrong with the line," before cutting off in static. The timestamp matched Keller's last known transmission window. When investigators checked the county's radio logs, there was no record of that transmission. Years later, that discrepancy would become the first thread pulled by a detective who refused to let the snowplow route fade into memory. Spring came late that year, as if the earth itself hesitated to wake from the nightmare that had swallowed Tom Keller. County Road 7 thawed slowly, its ditches filling with runoff that carried gravel and discarded snow chains down to the marsh. By May, the plow had been stripped, analyzed, and stored in an evidence bay at the Grayson County garage. Technicians vacuumed every crevice, lifted prints, sampled fibers, ran chemical swabs for blood, oil, and antifreeze contamination. Nothing unusual. The machine was functionally perfect, a mechanical witness that had seen everything and recorded nothing. Sheriff Mathers filed his final report on May 23rd. Subject presumed deceased. Cause: Exposure or misadventure? The phrase misadventure lingered like a splinter, an admission of defeat dressed as bureaucratic closure. Officially, the investigation was suspended pending new evidence. Unofficially, it was over. The Keller family received condolences and a folded flag at a brief ceremony outside the county building. The snowplow crew lined up in silence, their orange jackets bright against the gray sky. Mara accepted the gesture with dry eyes, but when the sheriff placed his hand on her shoulder, she flinched as if from heat. Through summer and fall, she refused to move away from their house on Miller Road. Neighbors brought casseroles, offered to mow her lawn, or invited her to church gatherings. She thanked them but rarely opened her door. At night, the sound of distant snowplows and off-season maintenance runs woke her from shallow sleep. She began keeping a notebook on the kitchen counter, logging every sound she heard after midnight. The scrape of tires, the low hum of engines, the static of wind through bare trees. She said it helped her track patterns. By winter 1993, the county had reassigned Keller's route. A new operator, Rick Naylor, younger and less cautious, drove the same stretches of road. On his first night shift, Naylor reported an odd interference on his CB radio, a faint rhythmic tapping between transmissions, almost like Morse code. He chalked it up to atmospheric disturbance, but when he told other drivers, they laughed uneasily. The ghost of Keller's plow had already become local folklore. In small towns, stories mutate faster than evidence. By the end of that winter, children dared each other to sneak onto Route 7 at night, to listen for the idling engine that supposedly appeared when the snow fell heavy enough. The legend spread across county lines: the driverless plow, the phantom of Grayson Road, the blizzard man. For law enforcement, that folklore was both nuisance and insulation. It turned tragedy into myth, softening the bureaucratic shame of an unsolved disappearance. For Mara Keller, it was torture. She hated how the town said her husband vanished instead of died. Vanishing implied choice, agency, mystery. Death was at least final. She told the sheriff as much in a letter dated February 1994. Every story that makes him into a ghost steals him from me again. Time passed, but not evenly. The Keller boys grew up under the weight of their father's absence. The older Caleb enlisted in the Army after high school, saying he needed to be somewhere that makes noise. The younger Ben studied mechanical engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, specializing in automotive systems, an irony that didn't escape the local paper when it ran a 10-year retrospective on the case. Mara aged into quiet ritual. Every February, she drove to the crash site, cleared snow from the marker post, and left a thermos of black coffee on the ground beside it. In 2002, 10 years after Tom's disappearance, a statewide audit forced Grayson County to inventory its inactive evidence. A clerk named Elaine Morris, new to the department, found Keller's file at the bottom of a storage drawer. It was misfiled under Keller Thomas J. Property Damage Incident. She opened it expecting vehicle repair forms, but found instead the grainy Polaroids of the plow, the scene sketches, and the sheriff's handwritten notes. One line stood out: snow consistent with 30-40 mph gusts. No snow displacement beneath cab door. Elaine mentioned it to Deputy Heller, now retired but still volunteering as a reserve officer. Heller frowned, remembering that night vividly. "I checked the ground myself," he said. "There should have been something. Snow doesn't set that clean unless it's been packed." That word, packed, triggered something in Elaine. She asked to see the forensic logs again. The lab's 1992 soil analysis listed composition samples from the crash site as mixed compacted ice with high salt concentration. Routine. Given winter road treatment, except that the plow's resting spot was 20 yards off the salted highway. Salt levels that high didn't make sense. It suggested the snow beneath the cab had been chemically altered, melted, refrozen, and hardened before investigators arrived. But no one had tested for accelerants or external contamination. Elaine flagged the file for review. Nothing happened for nearly a year. Then in January 2003, Grayson County hired a new detective, Michael Durand. A transfer from Madison PD. Durand had a reputation for obsessive re-examinations of cold cases, particularly those with missing person anomalies. When the Keller file crossed his desk, he noticed the same inconsistency. Durand visited the county garage where the plow still sat under a tarp. The machine was dusty but intact, its odometer frozen at 148,206 miles. He climbed into the cab, sat in the seat where Keller had last been seen, and turned the ignition halfway to power the radio. The static filled the cab like a heartbeat. Durand listened. Beneath the hiss of dead air, a faint, rhythmic pulse emerged. 3 short bursts, 1 long, 2 short. He recorded it, thinking it was interference, but the pattern repeated every 17 seconds. He had the radio examined by a communications technician who found a defective diode causing feedback loops that could mimic intermittent Morse patterns. But the tech added an offhand comment. Weird coincidence. It's close to a distress code variation. Durand checked. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. It didn't match any standard distress call, but it was unnervingly deliberate. He reopened the Keller case on February 11, 2003. The anniversary made local headlines again. Reporters reprinted the photo of the plow half buried in snow, the empty seat visible through frost. Durand's investigation focused on 2 possibilities: foul play disguised as a disappearance, or a systemic cover-up due to procedural failure. He re-interviewed surviving witnesses, starting with Mara. By then, Mara was 50 and tired of questions. She told Durand the same story she'd told every other officer. Tom left at 11:30, called at midnight to say the roads were getting worse, then vanished. But Durand noticed details that earlier reports had overlooked. She said the call had come from the garage line, not Tom's truck radio. Yet phone company records showed no outgoing call from the county line that night. She grew defensive when he pressed, saying, "I heard his voice. I don't care what the records say." Durand also tracked down Donna Pike, the dispatcher who'd taken Tom's last radio call. She'd retired to Florida but agreed to speak by phone. Her memory was sharp. She recalled Keller's tone, calm, professional, but something in the transmission had unnerved her. "There was a sound in the background," she said. "Like wind, but not wind. A kind of low hum, steady, mechanical. I thought it was feedback from the plow, but it made my teeth hurt." Durand requested the original radio recordings, stored on reel-to-reel tapes in the county archives. The audio from 2:41 a.m. was degraded but intact. Keller's voice came through faintly. "Visibility's getting bad out here, but I'll finish the loop before the next run." Then static, then, very faintly, something else. Durand slowed the playback, filtered out background noise, and boosted lower frequencies. The hum re-emerged, constant for 6 seconds, followed by a sharp metallic click. The waveform suggested 2 distinct sound sources overlapping, one close, one distant. He played it for Sheriff Mathers, now retired but living nearby. The old man listened with closed eyes, face tightening. "That sound," Mathers said. "We heard something like it when we examined the truck. Thought it was just the heater fan cycling." But the heater had been off when the plow was recovered. Durand sent the tape to the state crime lab for acoustic analysis. The report came back inconclusive but noted harmonic frequencies consistent with industrial motors, possibly generators. There were no generators within miles of the crash site. As Durand dug deeper, resistance grew. County officials questioned the expense of reopening a decade-old file. The state police refused to allocate additional manpower. Even his own captain suggested focusing on solvable crimes. But Durand's instincts told him there was more buried beneath the snow than anyone wanted to admit. He spent nights driving Route 7, retracing Keller's path with GPS and thermal imaging. The road twisted through farmland and woods before cutting across Grayson Marsh, a shallow basin that flooded every spring. In February, the marsh froze into a white plain that looked solid but hid pockets of slush beneath the crust. Durand noted how easily a body, or evidence, could vanish there. On March 2, 2003, while surveying the area near mile marker 44, his metal detector pinged over a patch of ground just off the shoulder. He knelt, brushed away snow, and uncovered a small, rusted object, a brass zipper pull embossed with Carhartt. Keller's 1992 incident report listed his work jacket as Carhartt brand, size XL, with a missing zipper pull. The discovery reignited media attention overnight. Excavation crews searched the surrounding area for days but found nothing more. No fabric, no bones, no trace of Tom Keller. The zipper pull could have come from any number of workers over the years, but for Mara it was proof that her husband had been there, proof that he hadn't simply vanished into thin air. Durand pressed on. In April, he tracked down the original Snowplow maintenance logs and found a note dated 2 days before the disappearance. Cab heater intermittently shorting. Possible grounding issue. Replaced fuse. The signature belonged to a mechanic named Paul Renner, who'd left the department in 1995. When Durand found him in Minneapolis, Renner seemed startled to hear the name Keller. "I remember that plow," he said. "Strangest thing. Radio interference whenever the heater was on. Static so bad we had to turn it off to talk. Thought it was just wiring." Durand began to suspect that Keller's truck might have picked up or transmitted something the night he vanished. Some frequency interference or transmission from nearby equipment. He requested FCC tower logs for the area, looking for signal anomalies. There were none. By summer 2004, Durand's investigation was floundering. Without physical evidence, he couldn't justify continued funding. He submitted an interim report suggesting possible environmental factors contributing to disorientation and exposure death, though privately he believed something else had happened, something involving human intervention. He left the department in late 2005 for a position with the state's Transportation Safety Bureau. The Keller file returned to the archives, sealed again in a manila folder marked inactive. But the evidence, radio recordings, photographs, soil samples, remained in storage, preserved in climate-controlled darkness, waiting. And in the winter of 2018, when a new detective opened that folder for the first time in 13 years, the story of the Snowplow route would finally begin to reveal what had really happened on that blizzard night in February 1992. The evidence room beneath the Grayson County courthouse smelled of dust, freon, and the slow oxidation of forgotten years. Metal shelves lined the cinder-block walls, each tagged with brittle manila labels from decades of investigations. Burglary tools, blood kits, broken glass. On the bottom shelf near the back sat a cardboard box marked Keller. TJ, Missing Person Vehicle Incident, 1992. The handwriting, faded from time and humidity, belonged to Sheriff Ed Mathers, who had been dead for almost 6 years. On November 17, 2018, Detective Hannah Cole opened that box. She wasn't supposed to. Officially, she'd been assigned to digitize old case files for the department's new record system. The Keller file had been one of hundreds waiting for archival scanning, but the note scrawled across its cover, "No prints under cab door," caught her attention. Cole had joined the department only a year earlier, after a stint with the Madison PD Cyber Unit, and still possessed the dangerous curiosity of someone not yet worn down by rural routine. She carried the box to her desk, set aside the brittle reports, and started reading. The details fascinated her. A snowplow idling against a tree, the driver gone, no footprints. It was the kind of story that didn't die in a small town. It just went quiet until someone new stumbled over it. Cole spent the weekend reading everything, cross-referencing the case against state archives and newspaper databases. She found 37 articles spanning 1992 to 2005, each more sensational than the last. By Monday morning, she'd decided to reopen the file as a forensic review project, citing modernization protocols. Her captain, Richard Meyer, sighed when she presented the proposal. "You're 26, he said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You're not supposed to be chasing ghosts." "I'm not," Cole replied. "I'm chasing missing data. There's a difference." He let her proceed under one condition: no overtime, no field expenses, and no press. Cole began by digitizing the 1992 radio transmission logs. The tapes had degraded badly, their magnetic layers shedding onto playback heads like snow. She contacted the University of Wisconsin's Forensic Audio Lab, where a graduate researcher named Eli Tan specialized in spectral restoration. He agreed to run the tapes through an optical scanner that captured magnetic residue patterns frame by frame. 2 weeks later, Eli emailed her a cleaned version of the 2:41 a.m. transmission. Cole listened through headphones at her desk as snow drifted outside the courthouse windows. Keller's voice was calm, measured. "Visibility's getting bad out here, but I'll finish the loop before the next run." Then came the hum. Slowed to 1/5 speed, it wasn't mechanical at all. It was tonal, layered frequencies that rose and fell in structured intervals. Cole froze, heart beating faster. She recognized the pattern from her years in digital forensics. It wasn't random noise. It was a signal. She ran a frequency analysis using audio software. The hum contained harmonic spacing at exactly 440 Hz intervals, standard A tuning used for calibration in musical instruments. More intriguing, the waveform's repetition formed a symmetrical envelope. 12 seconds of modulation followed by 6 seconds of silence, repeating twice before the tape ended. She compared the pattern to known sources: radio interference, generator motors, military frequency sweeps. None matched. When she showed Eli the data, he frowned. "That's deliberate," he said. "Too clean for environmental noise. Looks like amplitude shift keying, somebody transmitting data over." Audio. Cole cross-referenced FCC records from February 1992. No licensed transmissions were active within 50 miles of Grayson County during that time frame. Whatever Keller's radio had picked up wasn't legal traffic. It was something else. She expanded her search to include unregistered frequencies. Military archives listed a temporary experimental band test conducted from Fort McCoy, 90 miles west between February 10th and 16th, 1992. The project's codename was Snowpack, an early prototype for encrypted field communication in severe weather. The test used mobile transmitters mounted on convoy vehicles simulating blizzard conditions. The data logs noted multiple signal anomalies detected east of their test zone, one of which corresponded exactly to Keller's last known location on Route 7. Cole contacted the base's historical records office. The clerk who answered sounded bewildered. "Project Snowpack," he said. "That was shut down after 1 week. Interference issues. I can't give you personnel records, but there's a contact listed. Major Alan Drury. Retired." Drury lived in Madison now, 80 years old and partially deaf from decades of field testing communications equipment. When Cole called him, he chuckled at the name. "Snowpack, huh? I thought they'd burned all that paperwork. What do you want to know? Did your transmitters operate near Grayson County during that week?" "No. Closest we got was Sauk, but we had range issues. Some of the signals bounced hundreds of miles off atmospheric layers. Weird stuff. Sometimes our receivers picked up voices from local frequencies. CB chatter, police dispatch, even weather channels. Sounded like ghosts talking through snow." Cole hesitated. "Could those frequencies disrupt civilian equipment?" Drury's laugh turned into a cough. "Ma'am, they sure could. We melted half our circuits trying to stabilize the carrier wave." She hung up and stared at the case photo of Keller's plow. For the first time, the pieces began to align. Not supernatural, not impossible. A military test signal could have overridden Keller's radio, maybe even the control systems of his aging vehicle. But that didn't explain how he vanished. Cole requested access to the original plow, which still sat under a tarp at the county garage. The foreman, Larry Jensen, unlocked the bay and helped her roll back the cover. Dust motes swirled in the cold air. The machine loomed like a fossilized beast. She climbed into the cab, turned the ignition to auxiliary, and listened. Nothing but silence, no hum, no static. Still, the atmosphere felt charged, as though the plow remembered the storm. She began photographing every surface for digital reconstruction. When she reached under the dashboard to document wiring, her glove brushed against something brittle. A small square of paper, yellowed and curled at the edges, wedged near the fuse box. She teased it free with tweezers. It was a torn section of county road map, hand-marked in pencil with a faint line running parallel to Route 7. Ending near the words, Pine Hollow Reservoir. The pencil had smudged over time. But beneath it in smaller handwriting was a note, Test Site. Cole logged the find and cross-referenced historical maps. Pine Hollow Reservoir had been decommissioned in 1988 after dam instability forced evacuation of nearby land. It lay 20 miles northeast of Keller's route, far outside his plowing sector. The reservoir had frozen over during the winter of 1992 and remained off-limits ever since due to thin ice and structural collapse risk. On December 10th, she drove there alone, ignoring protocol. The reservoir was a flat expanse of white framed by skeletal trees. The air smelled metallic like snow and old water. She parked near the rusted no entry sign and stepped out, boots crunching over crusted ice. Something about the place felt wrong, the silence too complete, the horizon too static. She took photographs, logged GPS coordinates, and returned to her car. That night she replayed Keller's transmission again, focusing on the final seconds. Beneath the hum, almost inaudible, was a faint voice, distorted by wind and static, but definitely human. She boosted the signal until her speakers crackled. The words emerged in fragments. Copy. Loop. Hollow. The last syllable was faint but unmistakable. Hollow. Cole sat back, staring at the waveform. Keller had said, hollow, He'd been heading toward Pine Hollow Reservoir. But why? The next morning, she presented her findings to Captain Meyer. He listened without interruption, then rubbed his temple. So you think he drove off route because of a rogue military signal 30 years ago? I think he was following something, Cole said. Or someone. The map fragment proves he knew about the reservoir. The transmission confirms he mentioned it. Even if that's true, we can't justify excavating federal land based on a 30-year-old map and a ghost on tape. Then let me go unofficially, she insisted. Meyer sighed. You didn't learn the word unofficial from me. Take a volunteer if you go. And if anyone asks, you're auditing equipment storage. Cole contacted the only person still alive who'd seen the plow first that night, retired Deputy Mark Heller. He was 71 now, living in a small cabin near the Menominee border. When she arrived, he greeted her with suspicion that softened into weary curiosity once she mentioned Keller's name. I figured they'd forgotten him, Heller said, motioning her inside. Guess not. She explained her theory, showing him the cleaned audio and the map. He listened in silence, then nodded slowly. Tom was a good man, careful. He wouldn't leave the route unless someone told him to. Who could have done that? Heller tapped the map. Radio interference or not, that night the snow made people crazy. But there's something you should know, something I didn't put in my report. He disappeared into his back room and returned with a small wooden box. Inside was a Polaroid photo, its colors faded to sepia. It showed Keller's plow at the crash site, headlights glaring into the snow. In the lower right corner, half hidden by the reflection, stood a second vehicle, a dark shape barely visible through the haze. Keller pointed at it. Wasn't one of ours. I noticed it in the print later, but by then the negative was gone. Cole leaned closer. The silhouette could have been anything, a truck, a van, but its outline matched the boxy frame of a military transport vehicle, the kind used by Fort McCoy convoys in the early 90s. Her pulse quickened. Did anyone ever ask about it? No, nobody wanted to. We had a missing man, a storm, and an election year. Easier to call it an accident. Cole left with the photo tucked into a protective sleeve. She scanned it at high resolution, enhanced the contrast, and overlaid the image against known vehicle profiles. The match wasn't perfect, but close enough to make her certain. A Humvee M998, painted dark green, used exclusively by the U.S. Army during that era. She compiled her findings into a report, signal analysis, map fragment, photographic evidence, and sent it to the State Cold Case Review Board. 2 weeks later, she received a short email. Request denied. Insufficient grounds for resource allocation. Officially, the Snowplow route case remained inactive. Unofficially, on January 19, 2019, Detective Cole and retired Deputy Heller loaded a snowmobile and portable radar kit into her SUV and drove toward Pine Hollow Reservoir before dawn. The temperature was -15, wind slicing across the fields in serrated gusts. By the time they reached the frozen basin, the sun had risen, a weak copper disk behind clouds. Cole parked at the edge of the embankment and powered on the radar. The machine emitted a low whine, scanning the ice below. For the first hour, readings were flat. Then, near the center of the reservoir, a dense mass appeared on the display, metallic, rectangular, buried beneath 8 feet of frozen sediment. Heller stared at the screen. That's no rock. No, Cole said quietly. It's a vehicle. They marked the coordinates and returned to town. Within 48 hours, state recovery teams arrived with cranes and heated pumps. On January 22, 2019, they broke through the ice and retrieved the object. It was the skeletal remains of an old Army communications trailer, its frame half collapsed, exterior markings eroded but faintly visible under layers of rust. The serial numbers traced back to Project Snowpack, the same experimental convoy Major Drury had described. Inside the corroded compartment, investigators found the remains of a small heating unit, a signal repeater, and a storage crate containing decayed personal effects, a thermos, a pair of gloves, and a laminated county maintenance ID card. The name was barely legible, the ink bled by water and time, but the letters that remained were enough to end 27 years of speculation. Tom Keller. His body wasn't inside, just his badge. And on the interior wall of the trailer, scratched into metal with something sharp, were 3 words that froze everyone in place. Hollow wasn't empty. The recovery operation at Pine Hollow Reservoir was supposed to last 2 days. It stretched into 3 weeks. Sub-zero temperatures, unstable ice, and layers of frozen sediment slowed every movement to a crawl. Local news outlets swarmed the site, their vans parked along County Road 12, antennas jutting through the fog like insect legs. Each headline promised revelation. Cold case breakthrough. The Snowplow mystery reopened. Keller's badge found after 27 years. And, most sensationally, what lies beneath Pine Hollow. For the Grayson County Sheriff's Department, the publicity was both blessing and curse. They finally had physical evidence, but no body. The Army communications trailer, pulled from beneath the ice, was an artifact from another time. Olive-drab panels flaking into green dust, cables tangled like veins through its interior. The corroded signal repeater inside still bore a stenciled label, U.S. Property, Snowpack Prototype Unit 3B. Detective Hannah Cole stood beside the excavation pit as technicians cataloged every fragment. The laminated ID badge had been confirmed as belonging to Tom Keller, though DNA degradation prevented direct matching. The note carved into the wall, hollow wasn't empty, was now treated as potential evidence of human distress. State forensics moved quickly, establishing a perimeter and freezing the site under joint jurisdiction with the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation. Cole was assigned as liaison. On February 4, 2019, she joined the forensic recovery team for the initial internal sweep. The inside of the trailer was no larger than a small office, 4 by 6 feet, its air heavy with rust and the stale scent of hydraulic oil. Flashlights swept across metal surfaces scarred by corrosion. The heating unit had fused to the floor. In one corner, buried beneath debris, a small compartment was pried open, revealing waterlogged notebooks sealed in plastic. The writing was still legible. Inside were maintenance logs, frequency calibration records, and handwritten notes initialed AD, Major Alan Drury's team leader signature. The last entry, dated February 14, 1992, read, "Signal reflection registered east of Sector C. Civilian interference detected. Field unit ordered to relocate. Awaiting extraction. Storm intensifying." Cole reread the date. February 14, 1992, the night Keller vanished. She called Drury that evening, telling him about the find. The line went quiet. Then he said, "If you've got those notebooks, you'll see the part they made me redact. I warned them about interference. We lost contact with one of our own rigs that night. They said it froze over. Maybe it didn't." Cole pressed him for details. He refused to elaborate, saying only, "If you found Keller's badge inside that trailer, then someone moved it there long after the storm." The possibility shifted everything. If Keller's badge had been placed deliberately, the disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was a cover-up. The notebooks were sent to the state crime lab for preservation and chemical analysis. Within days, a lab technician noticed something odd. Traces of diesel, particulate, and hydraulic fluid on the pages, consistent with the kind used in county maintenance equipment during the early 1990s. When matched against archival supply records, only one consistent vendor appeared, Grayson County Equipment Services, the same department Keller had worked for. That meant whoever had handled the notebooks had access to county-grade fuel and lubricant, someone local, not military. Cole returned to Grayson County to re-examine personnel rosters from 1992. Among the names was one that triggered a cold unease. Paul Renner, the mechanic who had serviced Keller's plow 2 days before the disappearance. The same man who'd told Detective Durand, years earlier, about the strange radio interference and the faulty heater wiring. Renner, now 73, lived in a trailer park outside Wausau. His phone number was disconnected. Cole drove up in freezing rain, windshield wipers struggling against ice buildup. The trailer door bore no number, just a faded mailbox with peeling stickers. She knocked. After a pause, the door creaked open. Renner stood inside, gaunt and wary. His right hand trembled slightly as he leaned against the frame. "You're from Grayson," he said. "I've seen your face on the news." "Yes," Cole replied. "I need to ask you about Tom Keller." "Too late for that," he muttered. "Should have come 30 years ago." Inside, the air smelled of oil and cigarette smoke. The living room was cluttered with engine parts, half-built carburetors, stacks of technical manuals. On the table lay a pile of unopened mail and an old oscilloscope, its screen flickering faintly. Renner sat heavily in a chair. "You think I killed him?" "I think you know something about what happened at Pine Hollow." He rubbed his eyes. You ever see something you weren't supposed to, Detective? Something so big and strange you couldn't explain it even if you wanted to. Try me. He nodded slowly. That night, Keller called me. Around 2 a.m. said the heater was acting up again, but his voice didn't sound right. He kept saying there was a light over the marsh. I told him to pull over. Then the line went dead. You reported it? I told Mathers. He told me to keep my mouth shut. Said we didn't need panic. Next morning, they told us Keller's gone. But that light, others saw it too. Blue-white, low, moving slow, like welding arc light. Cole pressed him for more, but Renner shut down. When she mentioned the notebooks recovered from the trailer, he stiffened. You found those? Yes. His hand trembled again. Then you need to leave it alone. There were people in that storm who weren't supposed to be there. The conversation ended abruptly when he began coughing violently. She offered to call for help. He refused. As she left, she noticed the oscilloscope's display still pulsing faintly, a thin line oscillating in rhythmic intervals, 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. That night, Cole filed a report documenting her interview, but she omitted the mention of the oscilloscope. Something about it felt personal, like Renner had been living in the echo of Keller's last signal for nearly 3 decades. 2 days later, on February 12, 2019, Renner was found dead in his trailer. Natural causes, according to the coroner, heart failure. But when Cole returned to collect his statement papers, the oscilloscope was gone. The case deepened into a maze of coincidences that no longer felt random. Forensics later confirmed that the diesel residue on the Snowpack notebooks matched a rare additive mixture used only by Grayson County's 1992 fleet. That narrowed possible handlers to 3 people: Keller, Renner, and Keller's shift supervisor, Supervisor Dale Mercer. Mercer had retired in 2001 and now lived quietly in a farmhouse outside Ashbury, the same town where Keller's family still resided. Cole arranged an interview, citing a routine historical inquiry. Mercer greeted her warmly, offering coffee in a kitchen filled with old photos of county equipment and plow crews. He was tall, his posture still military straight despite age. When she mentioned Keller, a shadow crossed his face. Tom was one of the good ones, he said. Never should have been out that night. You signed his route schedule, she reminded him. I signed everyone's. Did you know about Project Snowpack? His eyes flicked up sharply. Never heard of it. But you worked maintenance 2 miles from where the unit was found. He shrugged. Coincidence. That storm scattered plenty of things. Cole studied him. The man's composure was too careful, his tone too measured. She noticed a small burn scar on his left wrist, circular, about the size of a radio fuse cap. The same kind of injury mechanics received when wiring shorted unexpectedly. As she prepared to leave, Mercer stopped her. Detective, he said softly, sometimes people go missing because others need them to. Sometimes a story keeps a town safe. The words followed her back to her car. That night she pulled Mercer's employment file. It showed that before joining county maintenance, he had served in the Army Signal Corps, Fort McCoy Division, from 1985 to 1991, ending his service just months before Project Snowpack's field test. The implication settled cold in her chest. Mercer had likely been involved in the test. Cole obtained a warrant to search Mercer's property. On February 20th, investigators combed his barn and shed. In a locked trunk beneath tarps and boxes, they found a bundle of magnetic reels labeled Test Archives 1992. When played, they contained encrypted field recordings, signal tests, voice transmissions, data bursts. Most were ordinary calibration checks, but one, time-stamped 02-4316, 2 minutes after Keller's last recorded radio contact, captured the following exchange: male voice 1, field 3, transmission stable. Civilian carrier intercept east sector. Male voice 2, interference pattern repeating. Request instruction. Male voice 1, hold frequency. Test reflection, observe response. Male voice 2, copy. Reflection engaged, then static. Then faintly Keller's voice, need assistance. Something's wrong with the line. The reel ended abruptly with a sharp click. Cole played the tape for the state investigators. The implication was clear. Keller's plow had intercepted an experimental transmission. The operators on the other end, possibly Mercer among them, had chosen to observe response, effectively turning Keller's vehicle into an unintended receiver. Whatever the signal carried, energy surge, electromagnetic interference, It may have disabled the truck or disoriented Keller himself. Mercer was arrested for questioning on February 22nd. He denied wrongdoing, insisting the tapes were leftovers from training exercises. When confronted with the reel containing Keller's voice, he became visibly shaken. "That wasn't supposed to transmit beyond test range," he muttered. "We were told no one would be out there." Cole leaned forward. "Then why did Keller's badge end up inside your trailer?" Mercer stared at her, jaw tight. "Because someone had to make it right." He refused further comment and requested an attorney. Forensics later confirmed that the Snowpack trailer had been relocated to the reservoir at least a week after Keller's disappearance, dragged by heavy equipment. Tracks matching a 1992 county plow model were faintly visible in aerial infrared imagery taken during that thaw, evidence overlooked for years. It was Mercer's route. The working theory emerged. Mercer, aware of the interference accident, moved the Snowpack unit from its test site to Pine Hollow to hide military involvement. Keller may have approached the site during his route, curious about the lights, drawn by a malfunctioning signal, and witnessed something he wasn't meant to see. Mercer intercepted him, confrontation followed, and Keller disappeared. His body was never recovered, possibly entombed beneath layers of collapsed ice or transferred elsewhere. The case was poised to become one of Wisconsin's most explosive cold case resolutions, implicating both county officials and federal contractors. But before charges could be filed, Dale Mercer was found dead in his home on March 3, 2019, carbon monoxide poisoning from a generator left running in his garage. On his kitchen table, a single page torn from a maintenance log bore the words, "There was no test. There was only us." Cole stood in the doorway as paramedics removed the body, the hum of distant snowplows echoing from the highway. Outside, flakes drifted in slow spirals, settling softly on the fields. The storm had returned after 27 years, as if time itself demanded symmetry. Back at her office, she reopened Keller's original logbook. The last line written in his tidy handwriting, "Segment 3 complete." Below it, faintly indented in the paper as if written over another sheet, was a second sentence invisible under normal light. Cole tilted the page under a forensic lamp. The impression surfaced, ghost-like, light over hollow, following. It was the final entry of Tom Keller's life. The case was officially reclassified in April 2019 as homicide, suspect deceased. But for Cole, closure was a myth. Too many variables remained unexplained: the missing body, the unaccounted signals, the lingering question of what the transmission actually did. Late one evening, as she finalized her report, her office radio crackled to life for a split second. A burst of static, then 3 short beeps, 1 long, 2 short. The same pattern Keller's plow had transmitted 27 years earlier. She stared at the speaker, frozen, as the signal faded into silence. Outside, snow was falling again over Wisconsin. The case file on Tom Keller should have ended in 2019 with the suicide of Dale Mercer, but the story refused to stay buried. For every door that closed, another opened. Old boxes surfacing in archives, forgotten correspondences reappearing, strange reports slipping through bureaucratic cracks. The Keller case had become a gravity well, pulling in anyone who touched it. By early 2020, the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation quietly reclassified it under a new heading. Incident 7H92, electromagnetic. Exposure, civilian fatality unconfirmed. Detective. Hannah Cole was reassigned to assist the review board tasked with auditing all remaining Snowpack documentation. The order came from Madison, federal observers involved this time. She spent her days in a windowless records room surrounded by boxes stamped with red declassification seals. The files were cryptic: circuit diagrams, signal path schematics, transmission logs marked EHF band test, sublayer reflection study. One memo caught her attention immediately. Dated February 10, 1992, it outlined a specific experimental goal: to determine viability of low-frequency atmospheric resonance for data relay through conductive weather systems. In layman's terms, the military had been testing communication through storms, turning blizzards into living antennas. The signal Keller intercepted wasn't just interference. It was a directed test pulse, a carrier wave bouncing through the snow-charged atmosphere. Cole printed the memo and underlined the section that made her stomach tighten. Warning: Prolonged exposure to resonance field may induce cognitive disorientation and auditory distortion in unshielded personnel. That, she realized, could explain Keller's final moments. The garbled transmissions, the erratic route, the absence of footprints. Disoriented, he might have stepped into the storm chasing a phantom light produced by electrical discharge. But one question lingered. Why had Mercer moved the equipment afterward, and why leave Keller's badge inside? By March 2020, the Keller investigation was formally concluded at the state level. Yet Cole couldn't let go. She continued working after hours, reviewing data she'd quietly copied before the files were locked away. It was then she discovered a secondary folder embedded within the Snowpack archive, an encrypted drive labeled Phase 2, Rural. Reverb. She cracked the encryption using old forensic tools from her cyber unit days. Inside were 16 waveform recordings, each labeled with a date and GPS coordinate. The last one, for Feb 92 407 317 and 904.221W, corresponded exactly to Keller's last radio ping. The waveform pattern was identical to the hum captured on his transmission, but this version extended 2 minutes longer. At the 91-second mark, a new signal appeared. A short burst of amplitude followed by a second tonal layer modulating between 420 and 460 Hz. The frequencies corresponded to the resonance of human vocal cords. Someone had recorded a voice imprint over the carrier wave. She ran the signal through deconvolution filters. Amid the static, words emerged, fragmented, distorted, but unmistakably human. Don't move. Stay. Light coming through. Then, fainter still, a whisper of Keller's own voice. Copy. Hollow. Seeing it now? Cole's hands trembled as she paused playback. The voice preceding Keller's was male, older, authoritative. She isolated the waveform and compared it to known samples. One matched within 89% confidence, Dale Mercer. That meant Mercer had been on the frequency, speaking to Keller moments before the plow went off the road. He hadn't been miles away at the depot as he'd claimed. He'd been transmitting directly into Keller's radio. Cole took the discovery to her superior at the DCI headquarters in Madison, Assistant Director Roger Klein, a gray-suited bureaucrat who had little patience for obsession. He skimmed the report, sighed, and said, "This material is classified. You shouldn't even have copies. Mercer's dead. Case closed." "Sir, the voice evidence proves direct contact. He wasn't just covering up. He was involved." Klein looked up with weary detachment. "Detective, we both know what happens to stories like this. They fade. Let them." She left his office with a reprimand and a formal warning on her record. But that night she made a decision. She drove north back to Ashbury, back to where it began. The Keller family still lived in their old house on Miller Road. The place looked frozen in time. Faded siding, the same pickup in the driveway, a wind chime tinkling weakly in the cold air. Mara Keller, now in her late 60s, answered the door with cautious recognition. "I saw you on the news," she said. "They said you found his badge." "Yes," Cole replied softly. "I wanted to tell you there's more to the story. He didn't just vanish." Mara's eyes didn't widen in surprise. They narrowed instead, as if she'd been expecting the words. "I know," she said. "They came here, you know. Back then, men in suits, said it was better I didn't ask questions. One of them took Tom's radio. Said it was malfunctioning. I never saw it again." Cole asked if she remembered the man's name. She didn't, but she remembered his insignia, a small silver pin shaped like an overlapping triangle and circle. Cole recognized it from one of the Snowpack memos. It was the insignia of Signal Development Group 17, a contractor attached to Fort McCoy's communications wing. Mara led her to the living room and opened a cedar chest. Inside were Keller's personal effects returned by the county years earlier, his gloves, a pocket knife, and a single cassette tape labeled Test Route, Feb. Mara explained she'd never played it. Cole borrowed it for analysis. Back at her hotel, she fed the cassette through a digital converter. The recording began with the low drone of the plow engine and Keller's breathing. Then came his voice, faintly muttering timestamps and weather conditions, standard procedure. At minute 4, a second voice broke through the static. Not Mercer's, a third, unfamiliar. It said one sentence, clear and cold. "Proceed to Hollow for confirmation." Cole froze. "Confirmation of what?" She ran metadata extraction and cross-referenced the signal strength markers with weather records. The voice had overridden the CB band entirely, impossible without military-grade power. If Mercer had been transmitting from nearby, then someone else, someone higher up, had been on the channel too. In early April, Cole contacted Major Alan Drury again, the retired Snowpack officer who'd once warned her. She played him the cassette excerpt over the phone. Long silence, then a rasped exhale. "That's not one of ours," he said. "That's command." "Command?" "Pentagon liaison. Signal Group 17 was civilian, but their tech came from higher up. We were told to shut down after that night. Too many cross-interference incidents. They said one of our carriers caused a civilian event. They never said what. Cole pressed him for details, but he refused. Before hanging up, he said something that haunted her. "Detective, if they told you Pine Hollow wasn't empty, believe them. We built that reservoir over something else." She spent days digging through county archives until she found it. The original land deed for Pine Hollow, dated 1956. The reservoir had been constructed over an abandoned mine network. The Grayson Iron Works, decommissioned after a fatal cave-in. The mines extended for miles beneath the marshland. If Mercer and the others had relocated the Snowpack trailer there, it wasn't random. It was concealment, the perfect place to bury evidence. Cole secured a team of forensic geologists from the University of Wisconsin to conduct subsurface radar scans under the reservoir perimeter. In mid-May 2020, the scans revealed anomalies, voids roughly 20 feet below the surface, irregular shapes consistent with collapsed tunnels. One cavity contained metallic signatures that didn't match natural deposits. Excavation was authorized under the guise of infrastructure maintenance. On May 26th, the dig exposed a narrow shaft lined with timber beams, descending into darkness. The air that rose from it smelled of rust and decay. At 20 feet down, the crew's cameras captured something glinting, a piece of orange-painted metal, curved and corroded. It was part of a snowplow blade. When they widened the shaft, the full shape emerged, a crushed vehicle cab, its frame twisted under tons of collapsed sediment. Faint lettering on the side read, "Grayson County Roads." The serial number matched Keller's plow. Inside the cab, skeletal remains were found, still strapped to the seatbelt, head tilted toward the shattered windshield. The jawline and dental pattern matched Thomas J. Keller. After 28 years, they'd found him. But the discovery didn't bring peace. Forensic autopsy revealed microfractures in Keller's skull and ribs inconsistent with impact alone. There were traces of carbonized residue inside the cranial cavity, a signature of electrical burn. The coroner's report concluded, cause of death, cardiac arrest induced by high-voltage exposure. Manner, undetermined. Cole stared at the report for a long time. The plow hadn't simply crashed. It had been pulled, drawn by some massive field toward the reservoir, as if magnetized. The high-voltage burn suggested Keller was exposed to the full resonance pulse of the Snowpack test. When she presented the findings to Madison, the room fell silent. One federal observer finally said, "Detective, none of this leaves this building." She understood what he meant. The official narrative would remain unchanged. Missing person recovered. Accidental death. The word accidental burned like acid. That night, Cole drove back to Pine Hollow alone. The site was fenced off, floodlights casting long shadows over the ice-scarred basin. She parked near the perimeter and walked to the water's edge. The night was windless, eerily still. Beneath the frozen surface, she could see faint reflections of machinery, the submerged remains of the Snowpack unit glinting in her flashlight beam. She switched on her handheld radio, tuning through static. The air was heavy with silence. Then faintly, a low hum began to rise, distant yet unmistakable. 3 short tones, 1 long, 2 short. Her breath caught. The same pattern. But this time, another sound followed, a voice whispering through the noise. She couldn't make out words, just cadence. Male, calm, almost gentle. It reminded her of Keller's last transmission. "Visibility's getting bad out here, but I'll finish the loop before the next run." Then, just as quickly, the signal vanished. Cole stood there, radio pressed to her ear, snow beginning to fall again. Somewhere beneath her feet lay the plow, the trailer, the badge, and 28 years of silence. The storm that had started it all was returning, and with it the faint hum of something still alive in the frequencies. She whispered into the microphone, "Copy that, Keller. I hear you. The static answered like a heartbeat. Snow began to fall again over Grayson County in February 2021. Light at first, then dense, until the fields and roads blurred into a single pale horizon. The Keller investigation had been closed for nearly a year. The official verdict entered as accidental death during storm conditions. But for Detective Hannah Cole, the story refused to rest. Every time the wind rose at night, she heard that low harmonic hum, the same frequency Keller had transmitted, the same that had haunted Mercer's tapes. She'd begun dreaming in static, faint voices beneath snow, headlights moving through a white void, and somewhere in the distance, the outline of a plow crawling endlessly forward. The dreams left her exhausted but restless, pulled by something unfinished. Her supervisor, Assistant Director Klein, had transferred her to administrative duty after her last unauthorized site visit. He called it a cooling-off period, but Cole's cooling off had turned into quiet rebellion. She kept digital copies of everything, audio files, photographs, memos from the Snowpack archive. She replayed them nightly, searching for something she'd missed. It was during one of these late sessions, at 2:17 a.m. on February 9th, that she noticed it. In the background of Keller's final recording, layered beneath his voice, there was a second rhythm, not the hum, not the static, but something else, a pulse occurring every 4.2 seconds, too regular to be random. She measured it, 14.3 hertz, below the threshold of human hearing, but known in research circles as the Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat. The revelation made her sit up straight. If the Snowpack experiment had used the storm's charged atmosphere as a resonant amplifier, it might have accidentally tuned into that natural global frequency. Keller's disappearance, and the plow's impossible movement, could have been a byproduct of an experiment colliding with nature's own electrical rhythm. She sent a discreet email to a physicist she'd met during earlier consultations, Dr. Emil Navarro, a former DARPA researcher now teaching at the University of Minnesota. She attached the waveform and asked for analysis. Navarro replied 2 days later, "Whatever this is, it's not just interference. The harmonic layering suggests amplitude coupling, like two signals phasing together until they act as one. You said this was recorded during a blizzard? That would make the snow crystals conductive. You're describing a natural feedback loop. If a vehicle with an unshielded electrical system entered that field, it might behave unpredictably." He paused before his final line. "You may have found evidence of the first uncontrolled field resonance event on record." Cole stared at the email. It wasn't murder, not in the ordinary sense. But it wasn't an accident either. It was a man-made storm that had swallowed one of its own. On February 12th, she returned to Pine Hollow Reservoir with a small recording device and a portable magnetometer. Officially, she was there on personal leave. Unofficially, she was retracing Keller's last route in the exact conditions of his disappearance. The storm was building again, matching the same atmospheric pressure and temperature as that February night in 1992. The snowplow route signs were still there, bent metal, frost-covered. The air felt charged, her hair lifting slightly with static. She parked at the edge of the reservoir and powered on the magnetometer. Immediately, it began to tick, its readings spiking and falling in steady rhythm. 14.3 hertz. "Schumann," she whispered. The hum rose again, faint at first, then building until she could feel it vibrating in her chest. She pressed record. The microphone captured what human hearing could only sense as pressure, the low throbbing of an invisible field pulsing through the snow. And then, faintly through the interference, came a voice. "Loop complete." She froze. It was male, soft, calm, Keller's voice, unmistakable even through distortion. "Visibility's better now. Roads are clear. Copy that, Hollow." Her radio, untouched, remained silent. The sound wasn't external. It was feeding directly into her recording device. The same pattern Mercer had described decades earlier was happening again. "Tom?" she whispered. No answer. Only the hum deepening, as if the ground itself were breathing. Her magnetometer needle spun violently. The snow around her boots began to shimmer faintly, flakes vibrating as if charged. The air smelled of ozone and diesel, an impossible blend. For one disorienting second, she saw it, the silhouette of a plow emerging through the white curtain, headlights glowing dim amber. The engine sound was faint but rhythmic, like a heartbeat through static. Then the vision fractured. The light collapsed into darkness. The hum stopped. Cole opened her eyes and found herself on the frozen embankment, disoriented but unharmed. Her car engine was still idling 20 feet away. The magnetometer lay in the snow, screen blank. When she played back the recording, it captured none of what she'd heard, only a 2-minute stretch of silence interrupted by a single faint click at the end, like a switch being thrown. She drove back to town, hands trembling on the wheel. A week later, Dr. Navarro called. He sounded shaken. "I ran your magnetometer data through spectral filters. The frequency spikes form a pattern. It's not random noise, it's structured. Someone encoded information into the storm." Cole blinked. "Encoded?" "Yes, think Morse code, but in electromagnetic flux. When translated, the pulses spell a sequence of letters, TJK1992, Tom Keller's initials, and the year of his disappearance." "How is that possible?" she asked. Navarro hesitated. "If you told me, I wouldn't believe it. But I'll tell you this. Your snowstorm is replaying itself. The same atmospheric resonance recurs every February when conditions match. It's like a natural tape loop, repeating the same electromagnetic pattern again and again. Whatever Keller transmitted that night, it's still bouncing around up there, trapped in the Earth's ionosphere, waiting for anyone tuned to listen." Cole ended the call in silence. She sat at her desk for a long time, staring at the caseboard still pinned to her wall, Keller's photograph, Mercer's handwriting, the map of Route 7 curling at the edges. Maybe, she thought, Pine Hollow had never been empty. Maybe it was an echo chamber, a place where time folded back on itself every winter, replaying one unfinished story over and over. In March 2021, Cole submitted her final report to the DCI, a 68-page document detailing the electromagnetic theory, the recovered evidence, and the potential atmospheric feedback loop. She titled it, "The Keller Resonance." The report was sealed within a week. 2 agents from Madison collected all physical copies, citing national security concerns. Her access to the case files was revoked. The Keller investigation was permanently classified, but they couldn't erase what she'd recorded. She kept a private copy of the magnetometer file stored on an encrypted drive labeled 14FEB. Sometimes, late at night, she'd play it through headphones, the faint hum, the rhythm beneath the snow. It never changed, except once. On the night of February 14th, 2022, exactly 29 years to the minute since Keller vanished, the recording played an extra 7 seconds. The hum shifted, resolving into faint words. She boosted the volume. "Route clear. Returning home." The line ended with a static pop. She sat frozen, staring at the waveform, knowing what she'd just heard wasn't possible. Months later, spring thawed the snow over Grayson County. Pine Hollow Reservoir melted into a dull mirror, still off limits but quiet now. The county installed a new memorial at the overlook in memory of Thomas J. Keller, 1954 and 1992. He cleared the way so others could find their path home. Locals still talk about the hum that sometimes rises over the frozen basin during storms. They say it sounds like an engine running just out of sight. Truckers swear that when visibility drops, their radios catch stray transmissions, faint male voices reading road conditions that don't exist anymore. Loop complete. Heading home. For Detective Cole, it never stopped being a mystery. Not supernatural, not divine, but human. A story of arrogance disguised as progress, of science tampering with nature's hidden pulse. Keller had driven into a field built by men who didn't understand what they'd created, and his signal had become part of the world's static, a loop carved into the very frequency of the earth. She left law enforcement later that year, moving north to teach forensic communications at a small university. On her first day of class, she wrote 2 sentences on the board. "Evidence never dies. It just waits for the right frequency." When storms rolled through in February, she still kept a radio on her desk, tuned low, and sometimes through the static, she thought she heard him again. Copy that. Roads are clear. Then silence. Always silence. Case closed. The Snowplow route. Wisconsin, 1992. Cold case. The investigation into the disappearance of Thomas J. Keller concluded with his confirmed remains recovered from Pine Hollow Reservoir. Though officially listed as accidental, the classified record acknowledges that atmospheric electromagnetic resonance during the Snowpack experiment likely contributed to his death. Unconfirmed local reports persist of periodic radio interference and untraceable transmissions during winter storms in the Grayson County area. No further investigation authorized. Filed April 14, 2021. Division of Criminal Investigation. Madison, WI.